Our first presentation will feature Michael Garris, Senior Scientist at NIST and Chief Technology Advisor for the National Security Commission on AI. Please welcome Michael.
Well, good morning. Great to see a full room. I have to say thank you to Kirsten for the invitation to be here today and the other organizers for this Booz Allen track. I've been asked to come to talk about trustworthy AI and to talk about standards for AI. And as Kirsten mentioned, I am a senior computer scientist, which just means I'm very old. Been with NIST a long time, wonderful organization. I'll talk a little bit about NIST and what we're doing with AI and supporting standards. And then a little bit of late-breaking news at the end about things that are happening at the commission that Kirsten also talked about. I'd like to say that I think this talk will probably go a little short, which will give you all time to be thinking about questions. And so I welcome your questions at the end. So jot them down. There'll be some runners on the sides with some microphones. So I'd love to engage with you that way as well. So we're all here because we're interested in or involved in AI in one way or another. But it's funny, you sit at a barbecue and you talk about AI and you walk away, you think you've been talking about the same thing the whole time. And in fact, you probably have different concepts. So just a level set here. I'm bringing a standards perspective. So here is a brand new emerging standard, an updated standard definition from ISO IEC Subcommittee 42 on what AI and AI systems are. The standard is got two parts to this definition, the first being system, the other being discipline. So a system, an AI system, a capability of an engineered system to acquire, process, and apply knowledge and skills. And that knowledge we're talking about are facts, information, and skills acquired through experience or education. So that's the learning piece. Now we think about AI as parallel to human cognitive processes. We can think about machines that do perceiving, reasoning, learning, communicating, deciding, acting. So I'm talking about AI this morning very broadly. A couple concepts to help us think a little bit more about AI. So AI is very broad. It's not new. It's been around a long time. We've got a history of symbolic AI and expert systems. We've got brain science going on. All this is AI. But a subset that many of you are here for this NVIDIA conference this week is around machine learning, statistical machine learning. And a subset of that is this deep neural networks, which has really kind of spawned a whole new wave of innovation, which brings us here. So another way to think about AI is today's AI versus tomorrow's AI, future AI, narrow AI. Applications, it's application specific, you're trained to a specific task. General AI, we're looking for more general human intelligence, so multitask. Narrow AI, fixed domain models provided by programmers, so special knowledge, special skills. Many of you in the room are probably coders. Future general AI, well, the programmer is envisioned to be much more out of the loop, and users can be involved then in training, and the systems themselves will be able to learn more autonomously. Today, you need to learn from thousands of labeled examples for deep learning. In the future, we would like to see technologies that can train on a few examples and then also from unstructured data. So we see we're going in one-shot and few-shot learning and things like that. But nothing yet on the horizon is outperforming the accuracy that you can optimize to with that narrow AI. Narrow AI tends to be very reflexive. Signal in, do some activation, decision out. Not a lot of cognitive reasoning taking place. Future AI, general AI, looking for these cognitive abilities. With this single training task, you have knowledge that doesn't transfer well from one trained neural net, for example, to another. Now we're seeing some of this change with convolutional layers that can get shared for transfer learning. In the future, we want to be able to see technologies that can really apply knowledge and transfer it from one domain and build into the next. And we really don't know when we might see general AI, but we know we have a wonderful technology today that's changing things in many ways, which is why you're here. All right, so what do I mean by trustworthy AI? Let me introduce you to the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Some of you probably have engaged with us, and some of you may not be familiar with our agency. We're part of the Department of Commerce. Our mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. Now, you note the underlines in this mission. As I thought about our mission, I thought, where is AI having an impact? Either for NIST or NIST for AI. Innovation, that's why we're here today. Industrial competitiveness, we're going to see that on the demo floor starting tomorrow. Measurement, science, standards, and technology, much of why I'm here talking to you today. Enhancing our economic security and improving our quality of life. Much potential from this technology. So NIST has a part to play, and it's a privilege to be a part of that. Thinking about attributes of trustworthiness, we want AI to have these following characteristics: accuracy, reliability, resilience, objectivity, meaning lacking bias or prejudice, security, explainability, safety, and accountability, and the list goes on. So NIST, this graphic is showing AI at NIST. And there's two dimensions here. There's the horizontal dimension, which is talking about application and development. So this is using AI for NIST. And then the vertical here is representing NIST's role in measurement and testing for research and investigation. So NIST for AI. Examples of this. NIST for AI, being able to quantify, be able to define in quantified ways definitions of these pillars of trustworthiness, the reliability, resilience, and so forth. NIST has a rich history, and some of you have engaged with our cybersecurity efforts at NIST. We provide a lot of leadership in that area. So some of these pillars were very rich, but not necessarily have we had this perspective and thought about how is AI play. And so these are the things that we are working on to bring trustworthiness to the community. And then NIST is a diversified measurement laboratory. So you can see just a hand-picked few of the examples of where NIST scientists are looking to apply AI to their work, to their standards workflows, and their applied research towards standardization. Internet of Things, robotics, materials science, smart manufacturing, biomedical imaging, and the list literally could go on for a number of pages. All right, so that's a little bit about NIST, a little bit about trustworthiness. Let's transition to talking about standards. What standards are needed? And, standards is a very powerful word. Standards are very important. I think if I were to poll the room and say, do you think standards are important? Everyone would say yes. But just like AI is a very broad topic, standards is a very broad topic. So, some of the areas that we can consider standardizing. Concepts and terminology. I started out with a standard definition, a draft definition for AI as an example. So concepts and terminology. Let's update our language and let's get us all on the same page once again. Standardizing data, the fuel, and knowledge, what we derive from our data. The human interactions, so interfaces, metrics for all these things. The networking of AI. Then there's performance testing and reporting methodologies. How do we put the metrics to use? There's safety, risk management. So not AI as one size fits all in terms of policy, but how can we do this measurement and assessment in order then to determine a level of risk with the deployment of a technology and then set policy accordingly. So that's what risk management is about here. It's taking an ISO standard and applying it to AI. And then trustworthiness, which we've been talking about. So I'm privileged to be a part of a standards body that's working on these types of technical standards. I mentioned ISO IEC Subcommittee 42. This standards body was kicked off spring of 2017, I believe it was, so 2 years ago. And China was the first to host. We've had 4 plenaries. They meet twice a year. And we have organized ourselves into working groups. And I'd like to give you an idea of some of the things that are taking place in this specific standards developing organization. Working Group 1, foundational standards. So this is where this work on concepts and terminology is taking place, and also a high-level framework for AI and machine learning. Help industry to be able to describe your development, describe your products in a way that is comparable. Then we have a working group on big data. This is led by NIST. It was started well before the beginnings of SC 42. ISO and IEC decided to take a working group on big data, move it into this standards organization, Subcommittee 42 on AI, because data is such a big part of AI today. So they're looking at a whole host of parts of a standard working towards a reference architecture for big data. All this stuff you could Google, get online, and also you can follow up with me if you'd like more information. Then there's a whole working group devoted to trustworthiness, which is a working group that I particularly participate in. And there we have just moved from a working draft into a draft standard, concepts for how to assess the robustness of neural networks. It's in this group where risk management is being worked upon, addressing bias, that objectivity that I mentioned earlier, and then ethics and social concerns. There's a 4th working group that's focused on use cases. And so those that are parts of industry that have representation at SC 42, there's going to be a number of organizations represented in the room that are at the table, particularly within the US's national body, which is Insights AI under ANSI. You can contribute use cases and your use cases. And with this, there's also a new effort to begin to assess the implications of the AI lifecycle across these various types of use cases. There's another working group, Working Group 5, on computational approaches and computational characteristics of AI systems. They're focusing on a standard right now on data labeling for machine learning, assessment of classification performance, and reference architecture of knowledge engineering, which is a proposal that we expect to be coming out soon. Now, one of the things you notice with standards is these topics, particularly here, data labeling, classification performance, this isn't new, right? This isn't new technologies, but to be able to bring the world together and onto a level playing field of defining how these things are done, standards come in a little later in the maturation process. Give you an idea who's at the table. There's 29 participating members as of October. I just got back from Tokyo, Japan from our 4th plenary at the beginning of October, and we had almost all representatives across these countries at the table. And one of the things you note, first of all, it's pretty encompassing. We're covering the globe here. You also see the evidence of national level competition. This is very important to every one of these countries. You'll also see a list of U.S. allies in here, and then you also see a few that are non-U.S. allies. So a very interesting mix of standards technical diplomacy that takes place at these meetings. And then there's a whole nother list, 12 more that are observing members. So altogether, that's 41 countries, nation states are represented at the table with SC 42. So that was technical standards. Then there's other types of standards, call them non-technical policy standards. And these focus on societal and ethical considerations, governance, And privacy, and I asterisk privacy because the way that NIST has put things into nice folders, we got privacy under non-technical, but in fact, as you know, homomorphic encryption, differential learning, and federated learning, all these technical things that are helping to promote privacy of these technologies. So it cross-cuts. Here, and this is just a gross categorization, we have the efforts of IEEE. And they have, as many of you know, they've created in its second version now, a document on global initiative on ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems, ethically aligned design. And as of I'm not sure when 7014 was added, but it's the most recent, and it's fairly recent. So you can see that there's a whole suite of activities here covering ethical concerns, transparency, privacy, bias, governance, agents, nudging. One that's important to me is fail-safe. Very interested in that. Metrics, privacy again, face recognition. So they're covering a whole host of topics in IEEE as well. And you might ask, well, how is IEEE and SC 42, how are they harmonizing? How are they doing these things separately with their communities, but also in a harmonized way? Well, we exchange liaisons between the organizations. I'd like to shift gears now to talk about from what's been happening at NIST, from what's been happening at the standards developing organizations, to talking about what's been happening out of the White House. I'm privileged to be a long-term part of the interagency supporting AI out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the National Science Technology Council. So I'm going to brief here just a few slides, and you see that I'm giving credit where credit's due to Dr. Lynn Parker. Lynn tomorrow, along with a colleague of mine from NIST, Elham Dabasi, are going to be on a panel. So I hope that you'll be able to see and come and listen to them. Not to scoop anything that they're going to say, but not everyone's going to be in the same room at the same time. And I wanted to talk about what's happening, particularly with the National Science Technology Council and NIST. So the efforts that came out of how many of you are aware of the executive order that came out in February on AI? Yeah, so you can get that online. This summarizes the motivations and the goals behind that executive order, prioritizing AI R&D, leveraging AI for government, promoting international and the environment for American AI. So international is the key there. Train the AI-ready workforce. Work is changing. How do we steer into this? Remove barriers to AI innovation and unleash AI resources. So come tomorrow, you're probably going to hear Lynn talk more about these things and unpack them. The prioritized AI R&D is primarily taking place by a three-tier organization within the National Science Technology Council. Starting at the top is the Select Committee on AI. It's the most senior federal R&D leadership. Basically, all the cabinet level representatives are at the table who have either a role in conducting AI R&D or funding AI R&D. So it's a great place to be able to coordinate at the executive branch level. They provide guidance to this second group called the Machine Learning and AI Subcommittee. I'm privileged to be the founding co-chair of that subcommittee under the Obama administration. Continues strong to this day, continue to participate. They're the operational arm. They're carrying out the work of the vision of the Select Committee. And then at the third is an AI Interagency Working Group, which is under the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Subcommittee, NITRD. And that is made up of program managers and senior researchers across the federal interagency working in AI. Now, later today, you're going to hear from Jeff Alstad. And I don't know if Jeff is in the room yet, but just make a plug. He's co-chair of the Interagency Working Group. So there's all this R&D coordination taking place. An executive order came out in February, and NIST picked up a task. And I'd like to talk to you about that. So, NIST tasking, quote, a plan for federal engagement in the development of technical standards and related tools in support of reliable, robust, trustworthy systems that use AI technologies. And we're given 180 days to pull this off. And I have to tell you that we've completed it. It was done on time, and it was a lot of work. And my colleague, Elham Tabasi, that I mentioned, who will be with you tomorrow, has a lot to do, provide a lot of leadership in making this happen and make it successful. We started with a request for information. Some of your organizations, I'm sure, responded to this. I started in May. We hosted at the end of May a workshop at NIST. Some of you probably were there. I'll leave it at that. We then went into a public comment on a draft that took us through July, and then the final report came out in August. So this report is available online. You can just Google NIST AI Federal Standards Engagement, and it'll come up. I'd like to highlight a few things that come out of that report. First of all, through not just NIST thinking about this in isolation, but we engaged the community, as I already described, and we heard from industry and academia and from organizations in this room and some individuals probably. What is the government's role here? And what we heard reinforced much of what we already do. That is, support AI research and development through that actually is supporting the development of standards. Actively engaging in the standards development process. I mentioned NIST, myself, we're participating in these SDOs. I'm really pleased to say that we have other federal agencies that are participating with us as well. And we need more federal participation. Yet we want to do this in a way where it's federal light and industry-led. The government can pave the way by procuring and developing standards-based products and services. This is where standards really get their teeth, where within a federal procurement, the requirements are put in that must be standards compliant. And then also implementing and supporting policy. So, recommendations, bolstering coordination among the interagency. I talked to you about the structures that we have in place for interagency coordination. Let's take it to the next level. Focusing on aspects of trustworthiness and how we can promote that through the standards process. This doesn't happen in just the private sector or just the public sector. This really is a partnership. And I appreciate the opportunity of being here today to engage with industry and to engage with my federal partners. And then also the international arena for these things. And I gave you a little taste of that from just SC42. Now, one comment about coordination and taking it to the next level. So we have some coordination of standards out of the White House. The NIST report actually recommends that there be a champion for that standards coordination to be established. So put someone in place who has a responsibility to see this coordination take place. And yet it needs to happen through engagement from industry to the standards organizations, industry with government to prioritize standards that get introduced to SDOs, and then bringing that to the SDOs in the end. So there's a number of different stakeholders here, groups of stakeholders. And one of the things that we're starting to think about is how do we engage them in a new and more effective way? So if you have some thoughts about that, I'd love to talk with you afterward. Okay, late breaking news, a little bit of a segue. Trustworthiness and standards are important for national security, of course. I'm detailed from NIST as the Chief Technology Advisor for the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. This commission was formed by Congress out of the National Defense Appropriations Act of last year of 2019. And today, it is made up of 15 commissioners, 13 appointed by Congress, 1 appointed by Department of Defense, 1 appointed by Department of Commerce. And these commissioners are accomplished journeyman when it comes to business, entrepreneurship, academia, and federal service in national security and defense. And our chair is Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Alphabet and Google, and our vice chair is Robert Work, former Deputy Secretary of Defense. And the other 13 just fall in line. There's a staff that I'm privileged to be a part of. We're 20 plus strong. And we have been working since our inception through an assessment, engaging with stakeholders, engaging with some of the organizations represented in this room, and perhaps some individuals in this room, doing an assessment to be able to then put together initial findings for an interim report. That interim report went to Congress just about an hour ago. It's embargoed until noon. It will be released on our website, NSCAI.gov. So this afternoon it'll be unembargoed. And we are kicking off the release of this interim report with a conference tomorrow. Strength through Innovation, the Future of AI and National Security. That'll be live streamed, so you can get to that through our website. What the commission is about is formulating, on behalf of Congress and to submit to Congress, a set of high-level, high-hitting, actionable recommendations on how to apply AI for the future of the United States and its national defense and security. So this is a very, very important time. I think you'll find this to be a very pivotal report, very interesting report, and the message of this report perhaps will prove to be somewhat unique from all the other U.S. documents from government that you've heard to date. So with that, you can go and follow it online. So I'd like to stop it there. I could talk about this all day, as you can tell. We have a couple runners with microphones. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand, and I'd be happy to field questions about trustworthiness of AI, standards process, the U.S. interagency, and the commission. Thank you.
Hello. I understand that NIST picked up the technical standards task for trustworthy AI, but my question is, how do we address the role of the customer in creating trustworthy AI? We tend to focus on the developers and data scientists, but don't customers have a responsibility to ensure that the developers and data scientists understand the requirements, fault type, fault tolerance of their industry, and that they use the model in the manner and under the conditions that are envisioned by the developers? Yeah, so excellent summarization of the need for ethical considerations within the design and deployment of AI. I would say if you looked at the different activities that are taking place in the IEEE 7000 series, that there is community there that's engaging on those in a standards way. So I would suggest that you follow up and see more about what they are doing in that respect. NIST is a non-regulatory agency, and so we find ourselves in this unique role of helping to bring measurement to policy, and where we can quantify issues around ethics, things like the need for privacy, the needs for explainability. Our goal is, from a technical perspective, to complement the policies that need to continue to be developed. So thank you. Don't be shy. How about one more? Yes, down here. Microphone's coming. Yeah, you're down in front, though. They can't hear out the back of your head.
So how do you go about developing standards, or, benchmarks for these standards? Is that something done with IEEE, or
yeah.
How does that go about?
Yeah, so I'll tell you my story in 2 minutes. I'm a biometric scientist, and we know that face recognition is being taken to a whole nother level with the deep learning and the classification technologies that many in this room are pioneering and working on. So how do we bring benchmarks to standards? It's a wonderful question. This is a unique opportunity that it's kind of a part of our NIST playbook. So we'll fashion a community around a technology. We will then, in this case, create tasks on a corpora of data. We'll define a protocol that the technologists need to develop and do this as a challenge problem. Could be an open challenge problem, could be a sequestered challenge, depends on the maturation of the technologies. But then what you've done is you've set a level technical playing field for implementation. You then bring evolving standards that do the measurement and assessments, quantifying these levels of performance in all these different kinds of pillars, ideally. We're further ahead in some pillars than others. Then you can do assessments and you can rack and stack. You can exchange information about what's working, what's not. And even more, you can then objectively comment back on the evolving standards and say, hey, this isn't cutting it. This isn't achieving the interoperability needed. And then there's this cycle, right? You kind of spin wash it. And over time, you can harden these standards in tandem. This is really the vision that NIST has used in the areas of AI-enabled technologies, and some would say AI technologies. The biometrics I mentioned, information search, information retrieval, natural language and human technologies, all these video analytics, all these types of AI enabled. We will bring community together to do these kinds of implementations, assessments, and feed it into the standards process. And by the time you get something that you want in terms of a technical readiness, the standards are ready too. So, great question. Almost a softball for me. So thank you. Appreciate it. All right, thank you. Have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Michael. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Adelaide O'Brien, who's the Research Director of Government Digital Transformation Strategies at IDC.
Hey. Thank you, Kirsten. I think this is the tallest I've ever been in my entire life, so this is kind of exciting for me. So today I'm going to talk to you about 4 trends and some key findings in government AI. And first, we're seeing that AI is really integral to government digital transformation, and we're starting to see it gain traction. We also know that AI can enable mission effectiveness and compliance, but it's complicated. And I'm going to share with you some of the nature, the complicated nature of AI that our government clients have shared with us. We also believe that explainability will enable agencies to develop policies and practices of responsible and ethical AI. And that means getting out of the black box, making sure that you understand the algorithms and the data, and that you are using these very responsibly. And then the 4th trend that we're seeing, and we believe very strongly, is to really start to scale. Agencies need to invest in many different resources above and beyond the data scientist or the chief data officer, and foundational work, and really understand and address this complexity in AI. I look at AI for government through the lens of digital transformation, so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we see digital transformation at IDC. For us, it's about fundamentally changing the nature of your business. And it's based on what we call third platform technologies. That's cloud, big data, social business, and mobility. And it's changing the business model, so changing how you deliver services and information to your constituents. And what's important about this is that you change your operating model from the outside in, or you use a human-centered design process to really change. So you're thinking about your constituents and your users within the organization and change your model appropriately. Now, despite the digital moniker, there's a lot more to digital transformation than just technology. And we believe it includes all 5 elements that you see on the left side of the screen, starting with leadership transformation. So leadership is all about not only your leaders providing the mission and the vision and in guiding you towards that. It's about them owning the culture in your organization and making sure that they're ushering in change management to adopt these new technologies. And leadership transformation is also about understanding the ecosystem that your agency operates not only in today, but in the future, because this is going to determine who you're going to be sharing your information with. Digital transformation also involves transforming the workforce. So this is all about not only giving your workers the tools, but it starts with hiring the skills that you need, and eventually using AI to predict the future skills and making sure you're training your folks to be there. Digital transformation is also about changing the operating model. Now, we typically say that if you're going to digitize, it's best to include cloud on that, tie your back office to your front office, and make sure that you're making data-driven decisions. Digital transformation, also we call it omni-experience. It's allowing your workers and your constituents to get any information anytime in the channel they choose. And then, of course, and what we'll talk about today is information digital transformation. So that's using, and as agencies are moving from business intelligence to big data to now AI, using that to actually transform their business. Now, what we've seen too is that when agencies invest in all five, they get much more bang for buck than just investing, say, in technology or in their workforce. So looking through the lens then of digital transformation, we know from our clients and our survey data that digital transformation is a priority for 100% of government clients and respondents to our survey. And then we asked them, so what place does AI have in digital transformation? And as you can see over time, survey respondents indicate it's going to impact about 87% say they're going to use AI to impact and to guide their digital transformation. So about 23% are using it currently as a part of digital transformation today. Another 36% will over the next 1 to 2 years, and eventually another 28% over the next 3 to 5 years. So given that, let's take a look then at some of the DX digital transformation goals that agencies have and how they're starting to use AI today to actually meet those transformation goals. So operational excellence is one of the top goals of agencies. And here, the example I'm using is how agencies are starting to automate their processes. And the example that I've called out here is NASA at their Shared Services Center. They're automating a lot of those processes, offloading some of the mundane tasks, helping not only the employees, but serve the other NASA constituents faster. And because NASA believes this is the first bot that was developed, they've dubbed it George Washington. Also, agencies believe that excellence in customer service and engagement is a top priority for their digital transformation. So here, we're seeing many agencies, treasuries and GSA, and it's not only to improve the customer experience, but agencies have discovered when they offload some of that mundane task from their workers, having excellent employee experience and happy employees also leads to better customer experience. We know that data capitalization and monetization is very important to agencies as well. And here I've listed the Open Government Data Act that requires all non-sensitive data to be available in machine-readable format. We think this is really going to help agencies, give them much more data to train their AI systems. Supply chain distribution is very important. Those of you in DoD now know how important it is to get your supplies in theater. But the example that I'm using, and I thought it was kind of a unique one, is actually one from GSA. And this is an example where they're actually using, it's in pilot, but they're reviewing their new contractors for some of their multiple award schedules. And again, they've dubbed this Truman, this particular bot, because that's the president who set up this agency. So it's kind of nice that the agencies are having fun with some of this new technology. And then talent excellence. Now, every agency that we talk to say that talent excellence is such a key. for them to accomplish mission. At IDC, we call that the future of work, and it starts with not only using AI to onboard the right skills, but also ensure that your people are engaged, and eventually we expect AI to help agencies understand what are the skills they'll need in the future, and how do they train employees to get those new skills and to excel in future jobs. Now, given that there is this interest in AI, and 87% of agencies say it will impact digital transformation, now we're asking agencies, how pervasive is it in your agency? And we see less than a fourth of agencies are either in, almost a fourth, are either in, pilots or proof of concepts or testing it. And only 3% actually are using AI enterprise-wide. And you might wonder about that because AI is so important to agencies that have lots and lots of data, and agencies in some cases have petabytes of data, and it's just very difficult to analyze that with AI, without AI. And the reason that we believe it hasn't taken off yet and it hasn't scaled is because it is so complicated. So I want to share then just a few views with you of how we see AI and the work it takes to use AI in your organization. So in this, I've got 3 different learning models: supervised learning, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. Now, when we think about supervised learning, that's actually training your algorithm to recognize patterns, right? And so in border protection, they can use it, and they've used it actually for facial recognition to prevent unauthorized persons from coming across the border. It's also very good to use for image recognition, and we know that the Patent and Trademark Search is starting to use it for that. It also can be used, in speech recognition, financial analysis, and forensics. The unsupervised model, it takes a little different path. And in this model, the underlying structure or the distribution of the data is not quite known to the data scientists, and they want to understand the relationships within the data. So again, some of the examples here is, border protection might want to use this to understand what are the relationships that particular bad actor has to other bad actors. It might also be used for cybersecurity beyond some of the known attacks by, again, some of the cybersecurity bad actors. But one of my favorite uses for this is when we think about health and human services agencies, they're now starting to think about what are some of the services and what are some of the bundles which, if we provide to our beneficiaries, will lead to much better quality of life, not only for the individuals, but for their families. The third area is reinforcement learning, and we typically see this as agencies start to train robots and maybe drone navigation and your self-driving cars use the reinforcement learning as well. Now, so in addition to that, I thought it would be important in terms of thinking about complexity to lay out the workflow, the AI workflow model. So this depicts it in 2 major steps in the workflow: the training and the inferencing of the model. So, the training starts with data acquisition, and of course, government does have probably the most data of any segment. But it doesn't mean that your data is clean. Is your data granular? Is your data usable? Do you know the lineage of your data? So it's important to get that step correct. We also see then feature engineering and data preparation. And I think one of the examples that I like about feature engineering is when the data scientist starts to combine some of the data sets to get better insights into the data. And the example is if you were going to determine and look at some of the risk for heart disease, you would look at maybe the height, the weight, the age of the individual. But if you start to combine and compute a ratio of weight to squared height or mass body index, you might get a much better indicator of risk for heart disease. So the next steps then are your model training, your testing, and your tuning. These 3 steps are very important, They're difficult, they take a lot of work, and they take knowledge to understand. Do you have any bias in your data? Are you causing any harm unintentionally to the individuals that you wish to serve in your model? And do you have enough data to actually train the system? You might need, even though government has the most data, you might need to get some additional data, some additional geospatial data, and some additional data, as some of the speakers earlier today talked about. Then the next steps are model deployment and model monitoring. And when you think about that, this is where you want to start to make sure that your model is responsible, that your model is very fair to the constituents. Is your model making better decisions than you could yourself or you have traditionally made yourself? And you have to model that over time to make sure there's no drift in your model. Is your model getting better in reducing its false positives? And also, is your model getting better in reducing false negatives? And then once these steps are complete, you want to develop your app. And in the case of border protection, which I talked about previously, you may want to develop this as a mobile app so that your border control agents can make decisions in real time. Now, another way to think about AI and to think about the complexity is the role between the machine and the human as you start to make decisions and use these tools. Now, at IDC, we've developed what we call an AI automation evolution framework. And it is basically these 5 steps. And as you think about it, it starts out with the human-led. And then in that, you want to look at who is producing who produces the insights, who decides, and how they decide, and then who takes action. So in the human-led, it is typically the human. They may use some tools. Typically, it's not AI at this stage. But as you start to move from left to right, the AI takes on more responsibility and more accountability within your organization for the decisioning, for the insights, and for the action. Now, I want to caution you, even though we believe that this is an evolutionary framework, it is not really, a roadmap. And you don't win if you move from left to right the fastest. What's more important is take a look at this, understand the roles and the responsibilities in your organization. When does the machine make the decision? When does the human make the decision? And do the people in your organization understand their roles and their accountability? And when they're working with the machine, as they move into some of the models where the machine is leading and the humans support it, do you have the right governance models in place? And do the people in your organization know how to work with that machine? Are they trained? And now, the other thing I wanted to say about this is the 5th stage, or the machine-controlled stage. We don't believe we're going to see that pervasively for another 50 years. So that gives us plenty of time to get caught up with mastering some of these other stages. Now, I'm talking about the complexity, and the speakers today have mentioned this, but there's many, many stakeholders when it comes to AI. Now, as you can see on this chart, I've put the data officer or the data scientist in the center. They are clearly the rock star of AI in your organization. But when you think of this, there's many, many other participants that are helping the data scientist or taking some of the insights from the data scientists and using them to run your organization. Your legal counsel can advise you on what data sets you can combine and which shouldn't you combine. The other thing is your program manager can help articulate some of their needs and understand better what happened and get guidance on maybe what some preventive action and what steps they need to take. Your Chico oftentimes is not only working to skill your associates and train them how to work the machine, but often is credentialing the bots or the RPAs that are working in your organization. The CIO is responsible not only for working with the data scientists, but making sure that your data is clean and you have enough data. And then I think that the role of the CISO is actually going to change. And today, rather than just preventing bad actors from getting your information, They're really now going to start thinking about how do you prevent data tampering and data poisoning, because you don't want that in your system. If you're training your system on that, you're going to have some very bad decisions. So again, as you think about rolling AI out in your organization, think about empowering all these roles in AI. So the other challenge that we hear a lot of times is, senior executives, the decision makers in your organizations, oftentimes don't understand, the impacts of AI, the complexity of AI, and the impact on the workforce. And we think it's important for those of you to help them understand, and that's why explainability is so important. What data sets did you use? Which didn't you use? Did you weight your data sets? Help your executives understand how that machine made that recommendation or that decision. We also know that there's all kinds of skills involved in AI, and in some cases, there's a cultural resistance within the organization to supporting the machine-driven recommendations or decisions. Is there a lack of skill? Is there a fear factor in your organization? These are things you want to be thinking about in addition to understanding the technology and deploying it. The other thing, and I talked about this briefly, but do you understand what data sets can and can't be combined? You never want to inadvertently disclose PII, so it's very, very important that you understand that before you train your machine on that. And then let's just talk a little bit about the resources. I've mentioned that, but you've got to develop, your AI software solutions, train your employees, ensure fair and unbiased practices, and not disclose PII. The first step in this, though, is your data management. And oftentimes, I'll go to conferences like this, and it's not discussed. And that really, it's not a fun step, it's not a glamorous step, but it's the most important first step if you want to train your AI system. Have clean data, have granular data, know the lineage of your data. And so the other thing that we think is important is this whole idea of protecting PII. And at IDC, we think fair and responsible AI is really about not having unintended consequences due to either algorithmic bias or data bias on the intended recipients of the action and of the decisions. And this includes not disclosing PII, even inadvertently, when using synthetic data. So we have actually created some essential guidance for responsible and ethical AI. And I just wanted to share some of these steps with you this morning. So again, here we are, first step, your basic data management practices. And that is just very, very important for you, not only to keep your data clean, but also monitor your data over time. This is not once and done. You've got to make sure that no bad actors are trying to influence your data through data poisoning or data tampering. Now, I haven't talked about design thinking, and Hypergiant talked about it this morning as one of their best practices. And we believe this is a best practice not only for AI, but for responsible AI. Many agencies are now developing personas. These are the people that they want to serve in their organization. Develop personas as you develop your AI systems and make sure you're testing and serving those personas well. Transparency and explainability is so important, and this means, explaining what data sets did you use, which data sets didn't you use, did you weight the data, is historical data weighted less than current data? What algorithms did your data scientists decide to use? Why did they choose those algorithms? And what testing have you done over and over again? And I think these will help not only your executives in your organization, but your constituents understand better how these decisions were made. Training the system on preferred behavior. You wouldn't hire someone, give them a laptop and say, go to town, do your job. So just like that, the AI system has to be trained and monitored. This is where, not only your government's monitoring is so important, but also performance reviews of your AI system. I've talked about the multiple agency roles. I have talked about test, and retest for bias. One of the things I wanted to mention is many of your industry folks who are here today, and particularly Booz Allen Hamilton, are investing substantial resources, not only in developing AI systems, but in developing fairness models. So I urge agencies to work with these vendors, but make sure that you're working with a vendor who actually understands and is committed to legal and ethical and responsible AI practices. And then finally, do recognize that, while AI is a much more mature field, ethical and responsible AI is just an emerging field, and there isn't a silver bullet, and it's going to take a lot of your time and attention. So as we think about then, and the title of this talk is Crawl, Walk, and Run, we believe there are 3 steps. I've talked about them. First, establish your process for ethical and responsible AI. Then create this governance process, and this is actually periodically reviewing your AI models. And one of the nice things that we've seen, and it's very encouraging, is we've seen explainability, trust, and governance move higher in the organization this past year. So that means that agencies are paying attention to this, and they're taking this very seriously. And then the third step is actually scale. And on scale, Mike has talked about all kinds of standardizations and best practices. We know that agencies are starting to share some of their models with other agencies. We encourage this. This is great. It's going to alleviate a lot of the work and alleviate a lot of the one-off developments that can be very, very time-consuming and expensive to develop. And then eventually deploy APIs so that you can reduce your acquisition cost. Now, I want to revisit the AI workflow. And I've talked a lot about complexity of AI. But what if AI software was easier to develop? What if it was easier to use? And what if it was easier for you to scale this? What if you had a trusted environment and then you could operate in this environment and deploy software developed models, and these have actually been in production? And what if this environment was robust enough that it could give you governance that provided trust and explainability? So after lunch, you're going to hear from Booz Allen Hamilton executives about their launch of an AI software platform. And this platform is going to make AI less complex. It's going to make it a lot easier to use, not only for government, but for all industries. It's going to give you a model of selection, and it's going to also give you models to deploy. And it's going to do all this in a very trusted environment. In other words, it will allow you to actually start scaling your AI. Now, before I conclude this morning, there's just a few final thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And the first is, we shape AI, thereafter it shapes us. Now, students of history will recognize this as a variation of Winston Churchill's quote, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And what Churchill was talking about is that the buildings that we live in and that we work in have an impact on us. And we really need to develop and manage these buildings for responsible use. And I think that's a great analogy to where we are now in developing and building AI. We need to ensure that we're building a habitat of solid, ethical, and responsible use for ourselves, for our children, and for their descendants. The other thing is that I think is important for us to recognize, and you know this, if you work in a federal agency, AI for you is more than just technology use. And so I really encourage you to work with the regulations, develop policies within your agencies, and deploy that and educate and communicate those policies to everyone in your organization. The other question, and as I work with our government clients, I'm asking them this because I'd like to think about the long-term impact of AI. So is your agency taking responsibility and accountability for augmented humanity? How are you thinking about this? Is it clear to the people in your organization who is responsible for the insights, who is responsible for the decision-making, and who is responsible for the action of that? And are you even thinking about possibly using AI to predict the skills that you want to retain and hold on to the future, and then train your people and make sure that they have those skills? What guardrails need to be established, that's taking a page directly from Suzette Kent's guidance. And of course, that's on making sure that not only your data is trustworthy, but the explainability of how you're using the data and the algorithms. And then finally, one of the things I think it's important to think about is really the long term. So as you start to move your tasks and your activities into machines, what is the long-term impact on your workforce, on the essential elements of being human and the essential elements of your organization? Because, in the excitement of using AI, in the movement to this, you don't want to lose sight of that. And I encourage you to start thinking about that now, while AI is still somewhat of a nascent technology in government. So that concludes my remarks from this morning. Thank you so much for your time.